Tesco has started giving out body cams to their staff as there's a high rise in violent attacks. Is the Conservative Party failing to keep law and order?
Well, again, look, it would be wrong to blame any particular political party for the behaviour of citizens who feels it's okay to be abusive and violent towards supermarket staff, who, by the way, are often very, very low-paid people.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's a problem within society that people should feel it's acceptable to be threatening, aggressive, intimidatory towards people who are simply doing their best in a retail environment. Okay. Do I think there are problems to do with generally in law and order about lack of police on our streets and disinvestment in policing over many? I do think there's problems, which we can debate on another occasion. Yeah. Do I think the Conservative Party is to blame for the threats facing Tesco staff?
Not particularly.
No, I don't, because I think that would be very churlish. Yeah. Okay, I think it's a very sad reflection of the society that we live in, to be honest, that supermarkets have to do this for their staff. It talks a serious breakdown in civilised behaviour. That's what would cause me a significant concern.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing that concerns me is the police response to this, because if it happened in a hospital, police would be all over it, but because it's a supermarket, police are turning up how many hours later when an incident happens? I don't think that's good enough. So I know you talk about policing figures, and the police association are always going to refer to the policing figures. But the police need to think about their priorities and how they tackle certain incidents, I think. So that's another... the government need to work with the police and how they actually approach certain aspects of the job.
It's about actually responding to these cases better and making them feel more safe.
Yeah, well, Suella Braverman last week was saying that the police should respond to all crimes in the same way. And I spoke about this on GB News last Monday, actually, that police seem to be cherry-picking what they're going to do and how they deal with people. So certain activists or campaign groups will be offered cups of tea by the police, and then other groups will be heavy-handed and they deal with them promptly. So there's a disparity, really, in how the police do certain things.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult because the Home Secretary will say they should respond to all crimes equally, and what police locally will say we just don't have the resources, Home Secretary.
In the perfect world, that's fine.
Sitting in your ivory tower. On the other hand, there is undoubtedly a very patchy responsiveness situation. And that can apply to horrendous crimes like burglary. It certainly applies to fraud, where there's millions, if not billions of pounds of fraud committed against citizens, where the police just say...
It seems like they turn a blind eye to that sometimes. Yeah.
It's more or less become the norm.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's be clear. As the new Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police has made a virtue of the fact that since he became the leader, things have significantly improved in terms of responsiveness, and I think he's right about that, to his credit, okay. But that illustrated that before he came there was a massive problem, and I suspect that that's not been resolved. So you do hear horrendous stories from friends, family members, neighbours, former constituents, about pretty serious things happening, and then police not turning up for days, if not weeks. But I know, from having been out on the beat with police in Bury when I was the MP, at least on 2 occasions, the level of police available to police the streets of Bury from Sedgley Park all the way to Summersea on some nights was 6 police officers, sometimes 7 or 8.
I've heard less than 9 in some areas.
You've got no chance.
Yeah.
You might. And by the way, when they come on duty, they've also got a whole backlog of cases that they're supposed to be investigating and gathering evidence for. Not to mention chasing missing children who have escaped from care, vulnerable children often, and so people. There is and also, by the way, and I think this has been spoken about a lot recently, the police are increasingly on the front line of mental health services. Because if somebody threatens to commit suicide, the police have to prioritise that. And because there's been a breakdown, a crumbling of mental health services, alcohol and addiction services, homelessness rising, again, we can have a debate about the government's culpability for some of this, okay. Because there's been a breakdown in all those subservices, you often find the police having to deal with matters which, to be honest with you, Ellie, are not policing issues, really.
No, well, that's changed. That's something else that's about to change, because the police are now not going to respond to mental health cases. There's going to be other teams that are meant to come in and do that.
So that should be helpful with that.
How long
exist these other teams?
Well, how long is it going to take to implement as well? It's an idea now.
Yeah.
How serious are they about it? And how quickly will it be implemented?
I'm sure they'll announce it just before the general election.
How will it be across the country? In some areas it'll be good, and in other areas they'll fall behind. And you're like, well, why are they falling behind and they're excelling in what the task is?
I mean, mental health services are in crisis.
Yeah.
You know, the health service generally post-COVID, that we know the health service is crumbling for all sorts of reasons. The government's announced a plan to tackle workforce shortages, which I welcomed on your programme, but it's about a 10, 15, 20-year plan. What's going to happen in the meantime? Okay, there are real problems. So the idea that, so the police say, we are no longer going to deal with the front line of mental health responses. Fine, so who is it? So you'll say to me, well, mental health services, and I'll say to you, well, there's hardly any mental health services in certain communities. So these things are coming home to roost to some extent. A lack of investment. Look, there's always two things going on. There is definitely been a lack of investment. We had austerity, then nothing to do with the government. We had COVID, and then we had Ukraine. Okay, then we had Liz Truss making things worse. All right, so there's some things the government are to blame for, other things they're not. Okay, but there is an underfunding, a cuts problem. But there is also a leadership problem in many of these services that are not to do with the government necessarily, where you have very patchy services. In some part of the country, services functioning really well because you have excellent leaders doing a really good job despite scarce resources. And in other places, you have a pretty poor service, which can be not just about resources, but can be to do with very poor leadership.
Yeah, and they can be having the large portions of money as well and not delivering on the service. But another thing when we talk about mental health, what I found when I looked into this with some of the services across Manchester, very disjointed. So people are being passed from pillar to post. There's not like one place where they can get treated for all the different issues going on there, from housing, employment, family support and all that lot. It's just not there. They're being passed. Oh, you'll come here for a week. Oh, and 3 months down the line, we can have you an appointment across the other side of the city. That's the big problem with what's going on. Until local authorities that are now charged with all these things get their act together and bring it together as a single service, we're going to be arguing about this for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree entirely with Stephen. I don't know why we're on opposite sides of it. I mean, successive governments have talked about the importance of joining up services. It's a very trendy expression. We need to join up services. We need to integrate health, social care, housing, benefits. All of these things need to come together.
Well, it saves time and money as well.
It does. And it also means people, as Stephen quite rightly says, are not passed from pillar to post. It means you genuinely have prevention. So you prevent people deteriorating and lurching into crisis before they're into crisis. All of that would be the case. But the truth is that when you have services crumbling, okay, the first thing that goes is prevention. All these services are doing are trying to react to crisis after crisis after crisis. And the worst thing I found, as a politician, the thing that used to really annoy me, as Stephen rightly says, the people who end up in your surgeries are the people who have been passed from pillar to post. Not one agency has taken responsibility for solving that person's problem. And often those people are the most vulnerable.
So how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Should the government set something up? Or?
You need pooled budgets, you need joined up services, you need to break down the barriers between different professional groups, you need integrated leadership. You basically need to have a whole service approach, a single service approach to some of these problems, community by community, rather than all these different departments that have their own budgets, their own leadership, their own management structures, their own bureaucracies. Now, in some local authorities, things are improving. There isn't more integrated approach between councils and the NHS, for example. But I'm afraid to say, in most cases, for the average citizen, because the most important thing is, what is the experience of the person with a mental health problem or their family member when they access these services? And Stephen's right, for most of them, they don't get an adequate service, they get passed with pills. And of course, they then deteriorate and they end up in hospital, which costs the taxpayer a lot more money if we got it right in the first place.
We should be running the country, really.
That would be an interesting coalition. You heard it first here on the LE podcast.